פתיחה למסכת שבת, an introduction to the tractate Shabbat. So, verse is easy, one verse in the Torah, maybe a couple of more verses some other places we see later on, but this is the main verse. The verse in the Torah in Shmot, it says, ששת ימים תעבוד, 6 days you should work, ועשית כל מלאכתך, and you should do all your work, ויום השביעי, and the 7th day, Shabbat להשם, it is Shabbos to God, אלוקיך, to God your God, לא תעשה כל מלאכה. You should not do any kind of work. Pretty much this is what it is. This is what we're going to be learning. So, first of all, we need to learn what are the prohibiting jobs that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. והמלאכות האסורות בשבת הן עיקר עניינה של מסכתנו. All the jobs that one is not allowed to do in Shabbat, these are the main part of our Mishnah. How many works we're not allowed to do? 39 מלאכות. The 39. הוגדרו על ידי חכמים, and they are set by the sages. In other words, none of the מלאכות are actually said in the Torah. Everything is the sages told us what work is. כאבות מלאכות. And there are 39 categories which we're going to call them the fathers, the avot, which means they are the main ones. And then we're going to see we have secondary ones. But the main ones, how many main ones there are? 39. המנויות במסכתנו, and all those we're going to cover in this מסכת. והיינו, המלאכות העיקריות האסורות בשבת. These are the main ones that are forbidden in Shabbos. שמהם למדים על שאר המלאכות הדומות להם. From them we're going to learn on other prohibited jobs that are similar to them. How are they similar to them? They look the same. In the way that you do it in a similar manner. And these are called toldot, offsprings. And it's important to know, as we're going to see later on, if it's a father or a son. It's a father work or an offspring work. Yeah? Because if there's going to be, for example, you're going to do a father and 2 sons of that father, so the question is how many korbans you need to bring. So you might not only to bring 1 korban. But if you did a father of this work and a son of another work, you might need to bring 2 korbans. So it's important to know which one belongs to which, and what kind of work, is it a father or a son, and so on. ברם, אף התולדות דינן כאבות. But the offsprings, the laws are going to be exactly like the fathers. Like it says, the rule is, תולדותיהן כיוצא בהם. The offspring is similar in laws to the fathers. 39 אבות המלאכות, the 39 אבות המלאכות, the 39 fathers of the מלאכות, מקורם בסמיכות פרשת שבת לפרשת מלאכת המשכן. Their source is because Shabbat is close in the verses to the building of the temple, to the building of the tabernacle in the desert. שלכך נסמכה שבת למלאכת המשכן. And this is why it was put in the Torah in this way. When it comes to building of the tabernacle, it was immediately after Shabbat. שאין מלאכת המשכן דוחה את השבת. The first law that you learned, that since building the Mishkan is an important thing, this is making God's place up here on earth, the most important thing, building the Mishkan. Also when it comes to Hasidus, doing God's job down here in earth is the most important things, but it doesn't out-trumps Shabbat. Shabbat comes beforehand. ומכאן שכל מלאכה שהייתה במשכן, and from here we learn that every מלאכה that he used to do in the tabernacle, אסורה היא בשבת. It is prohibited for us to do in Shabbat. And by the way,
the building of the Mishkan.
We're going to see in the Avodah, we're going to see all the 39 מלאכות were done in the Mishkan. וכן שנו בברייתא, and also we learned in the ברייתא, אין חייבים אלא על מלאכה שכיוצא בה הייתה במשכן. It says the prohibition to do a work is only about a job that they did in the Mishkan. הם זרעו, so it says in the Mishkan they planted. What did they plant for the Mishkan? Where is the planting in the Mishkan? The arazim, came from Egypt. They didn't plant them. The wood came from Egypt. So what are you talking about planting? There's no planting. So it says there is planting. Where? סממנים לצבוע תכלת ואורות אילים. They needed colors, dyes, to color the tcheles and to color the tachash skins, if you remember. ואתם לא תזרעו בשבת. So since they died in order to, they planted in order to have dyes for the Mishkan, you're not allowed to plant on Shabbos. הם קצרו ואתם לא תקצרו. They harvested and you're not allowed to harvest. הם העלו את הקרשים מקרקע לעגלה. They carried the beams from one place to another, from the ground into the wagons. ואתם לא תכניסו מרשות הרבים לרשות היחיד. Since then they took from the public domain and they put on a private domain, from the karka, from the ground, and they put it into a gala, into a wagon, which is a private domain. So you're not allowed to also take from a public domain and put it in a private domain. מכאן גם הגדירו חכמים, from here the sages says, שהמלאכה שהייתה חשובה במשכן היא נקראת אב, that the important work are called Av, fathers. ושלא הייתה חשובה במשכן נקרא תולדה. And those secondary, it says, how do we decide what's an Av and what's a תולדה and what's an offspring? Those which were important in the Mishkan are called an Av. Those which are not important in the Mishkan, we're going to call תולדה. מכל מקום, nevertheless, אבות המלאכות, the fathers of the work, וכן תולדותיהם, and also the offspring, אסורות הם בשבת מן התורה. They're both prohibited to do any, whether it's an Av, whether it's a father, whether it's an offspring, the prohibition is from the Torah. והעובר על אחד מהם במזיד בפני עדין, and if one transgresses on one of them, in front of witnesses, on purpose, והתרו בו שלא לעבור, and they gave him a warning not to pass, חייב סקילה, the obligation is death by stoning. ואם לא הותרו בו, and if there was no warning, then the punishment is kares. Both the same. I don't know if it's good to גרוע. I don't know. Actually, kares is actually worse, I would say. But the kares you can do tshuva on. The skila, there's no tshuva.
Skila יאורגן.
Yeah, but the skila is the tshuva. So there is an advantage in this. The skila itself is tshuva. Yeah, is the tshuva. But, so it depends on you. There's advantages and disadvantages in both ways. והעובר עליה בשוגג, and the one who transgress on it by mistake, חייב קורבן חטאת. He owes a sin offering. ומהו ההבדל בין אב לתולדה? So what's the difference? So according to this, up to now, Av and Tolda is exactly the same. So you might as well just call it one. Why is there a difference? Says, no, there is a difference, like I mentioned before. The difference, זה יתבאר במסכתנו בתחילת פרק ז'. When we get to פרק ז', we're going to discuss exactly the differences between fathers and offsprings. מסכתנו פותחת בדיני, our מסכת starts with the laws, הוצאה מרשות לרשות, of taking from one domain and putting it in another domain. שבה היא מוסיפה עוד לעסוק הרבה בפרקים ד' י"א. And we're going to deal with it a lot more in this specific one in chapters 4 to 11. אף שמלאכה זו נמנית אחרונה ברשימת אבות המלאכות. So it's strange. When it comes to moving from one domain to another domain, it's the last one when it comes to the melachot that is enumerated. טעמים שומנים נאמרו על כך. So why over here it's brought first? You should put fire first or something more important. Not carrying. Carrying is not so important. ואחד מהם, לפי שהרבה ענייני שבת תלויים במלאכה זו. It is because many things of Shabbat depends on this type of work. שכן כוללתי, because it includes many others. הוצאה מרשות היחיד לרשות הרבים, taking from one domain, from the public domain into the private domain, or the opposite, זריקה, throwing, הושטה, passing, העברה 4 אמות ברשות הרבים, walking 4 אמות in the public domain, and many, many things. By the way, according to Chassidus, it explains it in a much deeper level. It says that all the melachot, everything, all melacha, is bringing an object from one domain to another domain. That's what all the melachot Shabbat, that's what he does. You take one domain and you take it to another. Fire, for example. You make wood into energy. Yeah, or you dye something. Whatever you want to say, all the melachot is you taking it from one domain to another domain. That's what it is. So Hasidus explains this a little bit deeper, but we're not going to go to this. להסבר איסור ההוצאה מרשות לרשות, when it comes to taking an object from one domain to another domain, נשנה בברייתא, we find in a ברייתא, 4 רשויות לשבת, and this we have to be aware of. There are 4 domains when it comes to Shabbat. There's 4 categories that we need to know what the objects, where the objects are. What are they? רשות היחיד, there's the private domain. And by the way, don't confuse the word private domain by ownership. We're going to see. Private domain is not necessarily it is owned. Sometimes it is. No, not even owned.
No, rented. It could be rented.
No, it has nothing to do with who owns it. It's a location. And even though nobody owns it, I might still call it a private domain, as we can see.
Oh,
yeah. We're going to see. רשות היחיד, so there's a private domain, ורשות הרבים, public domain, וכרמלית, and then we have a carmelite, which is a third thing, ומקום פטור, and a place that you're not obligated. By the way, usually when it comes to the laws of Shabbat, מקום פטור, not obligated, doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. It means if you do it, we cannot punish you. Yeah, many times in other places in the Torah, when it says patur, maybe you can do from the beginning. It is not a problem. In Shabbat, when it says the word patur, it usually means you're not allowed to do it. But if you do it, we cannot give you a punishment. That's what usually the word patur when it comes to Shabbat. So now we're going to have a definition of what's a private domain. איזהו רשות היחיד? What is a private domain? חריץ שהוא עמוק 10 טפחים ורוחב 4. Any hole that is 10 טפחים deep and is got a 4 טפחים wide. Any hole that is 4. So even if you're it looks like you're in the middle of the desert. Nobody owns this land. And there's a hole which is this dimension. If you take one thing from the outside of it and put it inside of it, you're taking from a public to the domain to the private domain. Even though they're both, you can say neither. Okay? וכן גדר, כותל, and also a wall, שהוא גבוה 10 ורוחב 4. That is 10 feet tall, 10 טפחים tall and 4 טפחים wide. זוהי רשות היחיד גמורה. This is completely considered to be private domain. In other words, this is considered to be private domain. היינו, כל מקום, which means שאין שטחו פחות מ4 על 4 טפחים, that the area is not less than 4 by 4 טפחים, והוא מוקף מחיצות, and it is surrounded by walls, שגובהם 10 טפחים או יותר מהם, הרי זה רשות היחיד. So, in other words, every place that you can designate, you can see, oh, it's different than everywhere else. It looks like a different place. Either it's a hole or it's above ground, but it looks like different. We're going to call it private domain. So, איזו היא רשות הרבים? When do we say this is public domain? What's a public domain? Sarta. So this is Sartia. This is a big street. A big street, דרך המובילה מעיר לעיר, but not a big street within a city. A big street from city to city, like a highway. A highway will be considered a public domain. Highway. רחבת או ופלטיה, רחבת העיר המשמשת שוק מסחרי, or downtown Manhattan. Let's say it will have a big market over there. It doesn't these days. But Wall Street, for example, it used to be. It's the biggest market you can think of. That is going to be considered a public domain if it was an open area. not so much. It's a closed area today because it's rooms by rooms. But in that, so Sratia, Kikar Ha'ir in Hebrew. How do you say it? Kikar Ha'ir.
City square.
City square. That's what it is. A big city square in Rome. That would be public domain. Umevuot hamefulashin. And also another concept that we're going to deal with that. They are what's mevuot mefulashin, rechovot ha'ir shem rechavim. These are city streets that are wide, at least 16 amma, and they're open from both. It's not dead end. They're not dead end, because if they're dead end, it's not considered public domain. So it needs to be a wide city street, open on both sides, with no dead ends. Otherwise, it's not going to be considered to be public domain. Zohi reshut harabim gmora. So this is for sure from the Torah 100% public domain. And therefore, because it is a public domain, what does that mean? Ein motzi'in mereshut hayachid zo lereshut harabim zo. So if you have an object in a private domain, you're not allowed to take it into the public domain. Or if you have an object in a public domain that we discussed, you're not allowed to take the object into the private domain. ואין הכניסות מרשות הרבים זו לרשות היחיד זו. ואם הוציא והכניס בשוגג, and if somebody did take an object from the public domain to the private domain or the opposite, and it was a mistake, חייב חטאת, he's obligated a sin offering. ובמזיד, and if he did it on purpose, אנוש כרת, then he's, like we mentioned before, he's got karet. This is if he didn't get a warning. And if he did get a warning, niskal, and if he did get a warning, he gets stoned. Aval, so up to here, we know the definition of a public domain. Public domain is a street wide enough for many, many people to go on, and it has to be open in two places, because if it's not open in both sides, the one side that is dead end, in that part, only a few people use, and the public cannot use. So it's not a public domain. Public domain means the entire city is using it constantly. It's like the BQE in Brooklyn is a public domain. Everybody is using it. The entire world is using the BQE. Yeah? But over here, in Tucson, Speedway, actually Speedway you might also be called public domain. But the streets that go up, Alvanon for example, that goes all the way up, and then you get stuck on the mountains over there, that will not be, even if it will be as wide as Speedway, it will not be considered public domain, because there's a dead end over there in the end. Nobody's using it in the end. Speedway, everybody's using it all the way through. That's the idea. Okay. Aval yam ubik'a. What about the sea? Or outside of Tucson, you come outside of this Tucson, empty spaces, those things. They're wide, everybody can use them. Yeah? But they're not public domain, then we're not going to consider them public domain. Why? Because there's no foot traffic there. Foot traffic means there has to be actual foot traffic. People have to be there. So even though they're so-called public domain, they're not real public domain. Everybody can use it, but it's not being used. We're going to see the laws come because in the desert there was public domain because there were 600,000 men using the camps. So it needs to be 600,000 people to be a true public domain. There needs to be 600,000 people traveling it within one day. Now, I don't think China for sure has a lot of public domain. New York City is public domain. In Tucson, there's no true public domain. Yeah, maybe in Phoenix.
Like the highway that go through Tucson there.
I'm not even sure you have 600,000 people go through there. Yeah, in Phoenix, in some highways, you might have in Phoenix, in the major highway go through Phoenix. That might be when you come to Phoenix, but I'm not sure in Tucson you can even have. Yeah, for sure in Tucson there's no public domain. Okay. אבל ים ובקעה, but a sea or a valley, ומקומות הסמוכים לרשות הרבים, and things that are close to the public domain, שאין הרבים בוקעים בהם. Here's the point, that there's not many people who walk over there, וכן כל מקום ששטחו על 4 טפחים, in every place that the area is 4 and 4, והוא מוקף מחיצות, שגובהן פחות מ10 טפחים, but it is surrounded by walls which is less than 10 טפחים, אבל אינו פחות מ3, but it is not less than 3 טפחים. We're going to deal with this much later on, but we're just getting an idea. כל אלו וכיוצא בהם נקראים קרמלית. They are called קרמלית. קרמלית is an, you know, it's very interesting. Oh, it's very, very interesting. When you learn it, you see how interesting the people who put the Mishnah were thinking. You remember the categories that we talked about in Androgynous? It is not, sometimes it's a male, sometimes it's a female, sometimes it's both males and females, and sometimes it's neither here nor there. This is exactly the Arba Reshiyot of Shabbos. Yeah? Sometimes it's Reshut HaYachid, sometimes it's Reshut HaRabim, sometimes it's neither nor, we call it the Carmelit, and sometimes it's there, it's Makom Ptur. When is it Carmelit? Oh, Carmelit is when it's in between. It's in between. The problem with Carmelit is usually there's not enough people there. All the measurements are not enough to make it. It's not completely one area because there's a change. We can see there's a change in the area. But it's not a big enough change to call it a different domain. So we call it Carmelit, that's right. הכרמלית אין דינה לא כרשות היחיד ולא כרשות הרבים. So the Carmelit is neither private domain nor public domain. וחכמים אסרו להוציא מתוכה לרשות הרבים או לרשות היחיד. So it's not this one, it's not this one. או להכניס לתוכה מרשות הרבים או מרשות היחיד. So we're not going to treat him not like a male, and we're not going to treat it like private domain, not like public domain. כן אסרו לטלטל בתוכה 4 אמות כמו ברשות הרבים. But then it says, so you're telling me it's not a male, you're telling me it's not private domain, it's not public domain. The only place I am not allowed to carry is the public domain. Right? So over here you're telling me for sure it's not a public domain, so therefore I can carry 4 amot in the Carmelit. You say, no. For that, we're telling you it is like Reshut HaRabim. So sometimes Carmelit is going to be like the public domain. You're not even allowed to carry in it. Yeah? ברם העובר על איסור זה, but if you do carry in the Carmelit, patur, he's not obligated. And look at how you say not obligated. Not obligated doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. What does it mean? Patur? You're not obligated. It means mimita mekorban chatat. It says we tell you don't do it, but if you did it, you don't need to bring a sin offering, nor we can kill you in court, because we have to prove that this was a Carmelit and that this was a public domain, and it's safek public domain. So therefore, we cannot do anything to you. But still, don't do it. We don't allow you to do it. Okay. השם קרמלית, the name קרמלית, יש מפרשים שהוא לשון כארמלית. It is, some say the reason why we say it is like a widow, כאלמנה. It says, what's the idea like a widow? It says, where is she? She's in between. It says, what do you mean in between? She says, there's an in between. A widow is an in between. What do you mean in between what and what? שאינו לא בתולה, you cannot call her a virgin. She's a woman, but she's not like someone who's never been with another person. In other words, she's not a young maiden. Yeah? Sheino lo betula, but nevertheless, I'm allowed to marry her. I am allowed to marry her. Lo kenesua, but she's not married, which means everybody is allowed to marry her. She's permitted. For example, where do we see it? Usually by a regular person, it's not a problem. You know, by anybody what do you care if she's been with the man or not been with the man, as long as the man has been kosher, you know? So there's not a problem at all. So why is it being? But for example, for a Kohen Gadol, for a high priest, he's only allowed to marry.
He cannot marry almana.
He cannot marry an almana. He's allowed. Yeah. So he says, what about him? Is he allowed to marry him? So he says she's neither for him. She's neither this nor that. He's allowed. She's kosher. Yeah, but she's not kosher for him. It's not kosher enough. Okay. ויש מפרשים, so that's the first thing, that she's in between state. ויש מפרשים מלשון כרמל, Some explain it's like the Carmel, שפירושו בדרך הנוטריקון, that if you take the letters and you explain them, Carmel means רך ומלא. The resh and chaf means soft, and the mem and lamed means maleh, which means soft and full, which means wet and not wet together. Carmel means that it's in between state. It's wet and dry. It's right in between. וכן מקום זה אינו לא רשות היחיד ולא רשות הרבים. So this thing is exactly not this and not that. It's not neither here nor there. And then we have one more thing, which is called makom ptur, a place of no obligation. This is a makom ברשות הרבים. It's a place in the public domain שאין בו 4 על 4 טפחים. It doesn't have 4 on 4 area, וגובהו משלושה טפחים ולמעלה. Its height is 3 טפחים and above. וכן שטח שאין בו 4 על 4 טפחים, and also an area that doesn't have 4 on 4 area, and it has the right מחיצות. It is tall, like עמוד, like just like a pole, yeah? והוא מוקף מחיצות, and it is surrounded by walls. אף על פי שהמחיצות גבוהות 10 תפרים, even though they have 10 טפחים in the מחיצות, מוצע להציב ממקום פטור לרשות הרבים. You are allowed to take from a place which is not obligated to the public domain, ולרשות היחיד, and to the public domain. וכן להכניס משם לתוכו, and also to go from there into another. So let's take an example. You're walking in Manhattan, 600,000 people in the main thing, and there's a pole, right? And you want to take your hat to go like this. It's in Shabbos. You're allowed to take your hat, put it on the pole, and go like this. Yeah? If it has an area which is 4 by 4, and you do that, you just put your head from the public domain to the private domain, you're not allowed to. But because it's a pole in Reshut HaYachid, it doesn't have the right area to be really a private domain. It's not a private domain. It doesn't have the area to be a private domain. They allow you to do that. וכן להכניס שם לתוכו. גם אוויר רשות הרבים למעלה מ10 טפחים הוא מקום פטור. Also the area above 10 טפחים, the whole air above us, is also considered מקום פטור. ברם, אוויר רשות היחיד, דינו כרשות היחיד עד לרקיע. We're going to deal with that later on. We're going to explain what it all means, but the air of the private domain means that the air belongs to the private domain all the way to the heavens. To the private domain. Yeah? The air of the private domain goes all the way to the heavens. In other words, you have a private domain which has the right measurements. So if you throw something, the question is, if you throw something through it and it lands on the other side, did it go in the private domain, or it didn't go through the private domain? So the answer that it did go through. You can't throw over private domain, as we're going to see later on, which is, even though you say, what do you want? I took from public domain and it landed in the public domain. What do you want from me? I'm all good. So you say, there might be a problem. It's because it went through the private domain, you might have a problem or not, and we'll deal with this next time. מלבד איסורי המלאכות, ישנם בשבת איסורים מדברי סופרים, besides all the prohibitions of the Torah, the 39 melachos, there's also on Shabbat prohibitions from the rabbis, מדברי סופרים, הנקראים, and they are called איסורי שבות, and they're called prohibitions of muktzeh, and also there are prohibitions from Ovdin Dechol, which means one does not have to behave on Shabbat like he behaves on a weekday.
And all those 3 prohibitions is from the rabbis?
All of them are from the rabbis.
Okay. Is there a difference, do the rabbis make a difference between their understanding or interpretation of the law in the Torah versus putting a fence?
Yes, sometimes the rabbis can argue on what God meant from the Torah. Over here, they're not arguing. They know what God says in the Torah. It says, we're going to add something new. To prevent you from...
More milk and chicken.
Yeah, like milk and chicken. Yeah.
Chicken אל תאכל.
Exactly, like milk and chicken. That's a good example. Okay, so let's see. כתוב בתורה, it's written in the Torah, וביום השביעי תשבות, and the seventh day you should rest. ודרשו חכמים, so all it means, the simple explanation, in the seventh day you should rest, means you're not allowed to do any of the 39 melachos. That's what it means. But the sages are going to add something new over here. אפילו מדברים שאינם מלאכה, even from things that are not the 39 melachos. You what? חייב אתה לשבות מהם. You're prohibited and you are obligated to rest from them. From here, מכאן אסרו חכמים, הרבה דברים משום שבות. From this verse, the sages added many things that you're not allowed to do, and they called it shvut. Why? The idea behind the Chachamim, it says, if we're going to allow you to do this, then you're not going to celebrate Shabbat because it's going to look to you like a weekday. We want the Shabbat celebration to be felt. Also, if you start doing things that you used to do on a weekday, it's automatically, that's one thing, but there's a second reason. Because you're going to come, it's that's right. Because in your
this and then I can do this.
It's not that even in your mind; it's become automatically because you used to do something. If you touch it all the time, for example, take the zero. There's no problem in holding a pen on Shabbos. There's no problem. You're not writing. You're prohibited in writing. But it says a person will be playing with a pen on Shabbos. You know what's going to happen?
You write it.
He's going to write. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before it deserves. That's right. Or a lamp, especially in those days. The lamp. You touch it. You're going to. Exactly.
I said, I'm not going to do it, and he did.
That's right. It's exactly that. Okay. מכאן אסרו חכמים הרבה דברים משום שבות. So the sages prohibited many things because of שבות. כדי שיהיה השבת יום שביתה ומנוחה. So that the Shabbat, like the first explanation we said, is going to be a day of rest and stopping of work. איסורים אלו הם בדברים הדומים למלאכות. All these prohibitions are in things that are similar to the 39 מלאכות, 39 works. או בדברים שגוזרים בהם שמא יבואו על ידם לידי איסור מלאכה של תורה. Or things that they made a decree because, like the example with the pen, maybe you're going to come and write. כפי שיובהר במסכתנו, like we're going to explain in our מסכת. So first thing he's going to discuss is איסורי מוקצה. What is מוקצה? היינו, דברים שאסרו חכמים לטלטלם בשבת. These are things that the sage says you're not allowed to move them on Shabbat.
Even though you have a eruv.
Yeah, in your house.
Okay.
In your house. In your house even. מפני שלא היו מוכנים מערב שבת להשתמש בהם בשבת לצרכי דברים המותרים. In other words, if from before Shabbat you wouldn't be allowed to use it for something permissible, therefore on Shabbat you're not allowed even to take it. שכן נאמר בתורה, it says, where do you find this? Where do you find such a strange thing? The rabbis have to rely on something. It says, והכינו את אשר יביאו. It says, they prepared the things that they brought. ומכאן כל דבר שאינו מוכן, and from here, everything that is not prepared, הרי הוא מוקצה לשבת. It becomes מוקצה for Shabbos. ואסור לטלטלו בשבת משום סייג. And one is not allowed to move it on Shabbat because of סייג. שלא יבוא אדם לידי עבירה של איסור תורה. So that a person is not going to come to prohibition of going against Torah rule. איסורי מוקצה מתחלקים לסוגים שונים. And even in מוקצה we're going to see, we're going to have many kinds of מוקצה. It's not just one kind. There's מוקצה מחמת איסור. It's מוקצה because it's prohibited. For example, the pen that we discussed. It's מוקצה מחמת איסור. You're not allowed to write on Shabbat, therefore don't touch a pen. That's what it means. כגון מכשירי עבודה או חמרי עבודה. This is things that prepare the work or things for even ink. The ink bottle. Don't touch. Because you're going to put the ink, you might start putting the ink in the pen and start working, whatever it is. So that's the one thing. There's also another muktzeh, which we're going to discuss. It's an interesting muktzeh. Muktzeh mechamat chisaron kis. This is called muktzeh because it is expensive. You're worried about it. There's going to be a loss of money because of it. For example, בדבר שאדם מקפיד עליו שלא להשתמש בו אלא לצורך מלאכתו המיוחדת. For example, somebody has a knife that he uses for circumcision. It's a very expensive knife. And he decides, you know what, I don't have a knife to cut my salami on Shabbat. So the question is, it's a knife. Am I allowed to use this knife to cut my salami? So the answer is not, because you're usually not going to use such a knife to cut a salami because it's an expensive knife. You will just use it for that use. So we're not going to let you use that particular.
In other words, for that particular use, depend. You maybe
you're allowed to do it on Shabbat, circumcision, right. But you're not allowed to use it for cutting a salami. Yeah.
So if it's not expensive, can you just go get a tool from the shed?
If it's not expensive, if you've got, for example, a regular knife that you usually use for bread, you're allowed to use it for salami.
No, not for bread. You have a knife in the tool shed. You don't use. I mean, it's only for. You don't use it for cooking or anything.
Is it precious to you?
You're allowed to use it. It's not good. Usually, a knife in a tool shed is going to be a rough knife.
Yeah.
You're not going to be worried about it. But if you have a knife you're cutting diamonds, and you have a knife for diamonds, you know that it's very delicate or whatever it is. Diamonds probably not going to be delicate, but the idea, that you only use it for your jewelry, and now you want to use it, no, you won't be able to. Okay? But your bread knife, you're allowed to use the salami with.
So why is Mechamat Chisaron Kis? What the Chisaron Kis is?
Because it's an expensive knife. By the way, the Chisaron Kis doesn't mean it's worth $1 million. It can be 5 pennies. But it means you're not, a normal person will not use such a knife for such a job.
I see. That's the Chisaron.
That's the Chisaron Kis. Nobody would use, like if you have the possibility, nobody would use this knife for that thing. In other words, if your boss will come over there and he's looking at you and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? You crazy? This is what you use. You know, or take a tool. Everybody works with tools. When you use it the wrong way, you damage the tools. That's not the use of the tool. Don't start using it for that. That's the idea.
Okay.
So that's muktzeh mechamat chisaron. And we're going to cover all those cases when we're going to get to it. Muktzeh mechamat mius. There's also muktzeh because it's disgusting. Yeah. בדבר שדעתו של אדם בוחלת בו, ומשום כך הוא נמנע מלנגוע בו. Anything that is disgusting and you won't be able to touch. For there's muktzeh mechamat mitzvah. There's also muktzeh because of a commandment. For example, בדברים המיוחדים לקיום מצווה שאי אפשר לקיימה בשבת. For example, you have a lulav. The lulav on Shabbat becomes muktzeh. Says, what's muktzeh? We're going to see later on. בדברים המיוחדים לקיום מצווה שאי אפשר לקיים בשבת, כגון שופר ולולב וכיוצא בזה. Like a shofar and a lulav, you're not allowed to blow them on Shabbat, you're not allowed to shake on Shabbat. Even though there's what's with the shofar? Shofar, there is even a problem. Shofar, you might come to blow it. But lulav, what's the problem if I'm going to touch a lulav? It says, no, it's a problem, lulav, because it's only for a commandment, there's no other use for it.
Okay.
It's
special tool.
It's a special tool for a commandment.
No, you're not even supposed to touch it.
That's right, on Shabbat.
Let's say it's in your sukkah on the table. I mean, we're going to get to all this. But
so
you're going to move it off the table because you want to eat on the table.
So we're going to learn on our own that which ones you're allowed to move because you need the space, which one you're not allowed to move because you need the space.
How you move it.
Yeah, and how you move it. Yeah. So we're going to learn that further on, much further on. And there's this muktzeh mechamat nolad. And that is the last thing is a muktzeh mechamat nolad, means it wasn't there before Shabbat. It appeared on Shabbat. It became new on Shabbat. In other words, before Shabbat, we didn't have it. כגון ביצה שנולדה בשבת, for example, an egg that was hatched on Shabbat, or a fruit that fell off the tree on Shabbat. Are you allowed to eat that fruit? וכן ישנם עוד סוגים, כפי שנלמד במסכתנו. There's many others, like we're going to cover, but these are the main ones. Okay? So we covered muktzeh. This is muktzeh. All the laws of muktzeh, just to remember, are from the rabbis. All the laws of muktzeh are rabbinic laws. And like our system is, when you have a safek, you have a doubt in rabbinic law, you're going to go lenient, and you have a doubt in Torah law, you're going to go stringent. That is going to remain our focus. That's why you need to know if it's a muktzeh or it's a melacha. Yeah, which one is the prohibition? ויש דברים שחכמים אסרו אותם בשבת, and there are those things, again, this is rabbinic laws, the rabbis prohibited on Shabbat, אף על פי שאינם דומים למלאכה, even though they're not similar to work, everybody sees they're not working, ואינם מביאים לידי מלאכה, and they're not going to make you come to work. It's not like it will remind you, subconsciously to start writing. No. אלא, so why did the rabbis prohibited them? כדי שלא ינהג אדם בשבת כדרך שנוהג בחול. This is for that Shabbat is going to be a special day. If we're going to let you behave on Shabbat on a regular weekday, you're not going to have to see the specialty of Shabbat. That's the idea behind this. איסורים אלו נקראים עובדין דחול. All this is called behavior. Don't behave like you behave on a regular day. מעשים של חום, deeds of regular day. ונלמדים ממה שנאמר, where did the sages got a clue for that, a hint for that? So they got a hint from that, from Yeshayahu, from the prophet Yeshayahu, and over there it says, אם תשיב משבת רגלך, if you're going to, if you're going to,
it says, turn away your foot.
If you're going to turn away your foot, עשות חפציך ביום קודשי, do your wanting or your will in my holy day, you're not supposed to. You're not going to do regular jobs that you could do on a regular day. You're not going to keep it for Shabbat. וקראת לשבת עונג. You have to beset the Shabbat as a day of pleasure. לקדוש השם מכובד, so that you're going to honor the glorified God. וכיבדתו מעשות דרכיך, and you should, how do you honor Shabbat? From doing your deed, ממצוא חפצך ודבר דבר. From finding your things and דבר דבר, it says even your speech on Shabbat should be different than your speech on a weekday. You're not going to speak on Shabbat about things that you speak on a weekday. ודרשו חז"ל, and our sages learned from this word, וכיבדתו מעשות דרכיך. You honor the Shabbat from doing your things, שלא יהיה הילוכך בשבת כי הילוכך ביום חול. You're not going to walk on Shabbat like you walk on a regular day. On a regular day, you rush, let's say, to your job, you run to your car to go quickly, from one place to another. On Shabbat, you relax. You take your time. You don't, go around like crazy like it's a weekday. And then they saw ממצוא חפצך, from finding your things, your חפצים, in English, your possession, שלא תעסוק ולא תתכנן תוכניות בשבת בענייני חפציך. Or even more, better than that, you're not going to, on Shabbat, plan things that have to do with your job. For example, let's say you have a big orchard, and now it's harvest time, so you're going to take a stroll through the orchard on Shabbat to check on which trees is the north side of the orchard ready for harvest, or the south side of the orchard ready for harvest, because you're planning on Shabbat something to do for the next day. That's
which one I give to Truma.
That's right. Or which one to the workers to come from the east or from the west, whatever. ודבר דבר, and also your speech has to be different. שלא יהיה דיבורך בשבת כדיבורך בחול. You shouldn't be speaking on Shabbat like you're speaking on a weekday. ומכאן, from here they learned, שאסור לדבר בשבת, that one is not allowed to speak on Shabbat, כל דיבור שיש לו שייכות לענייני חול. In other Shabbat, the only thing you're allowed to talk is Torah. There's no other talks on Shabbat. Just Torah laws. כל האיסורים הללו עושים את יום השבת לשבת, שבתון קודש להשם. All these prohibitions make Shabbat a special day for God. וכן אמרו בירושלמי, and also they say in Yerushalmi, לא ניתנו שבתות וימים טובים. It says Shabbat and holidays were only given, אלא לעסוק בהם בדברי תורה. The only thing you can do in Shabbat and Yom Tov is matters of Torah. That's the only thing they're designed for. No other things is supposed to do on Shabbat.
I wonder why they don't explain what is the difference between Melacha and Avodah.
When they say melacha,
זה עבודה?
no, not necessarily, because some avodah can be, for example, if you're a scientist, your job sometimes can be just thinking. So you're not doing a melacha. Thinking is not a melacha. But let's say your job. But avodah means you're busy with thinking about your job. You're not. There's no prohibition over here. There's no melacha, but there is avodah. So you tell the scientist, even though your kind of job, you don't chop wood, you're even not allowed to think about science on Shabbat. That's the idea. That's the difference between the two.